So first of all, I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever our audience is right now. I've seen some names and I know we're spanning the globe, which is awesome. And my name is Letitia Zwickert. I'm founder and CEO of MENTEE. And I'd like to just share really quickly for those who are not familiar with MENTEE, a little bit about the organization. So MENTEE is a virtual and global nonprofit. It empowers those who are 18 and older and marginalized in their own communities with open access to a network of global specialist mentors who help support them, help guide them, who help train them. We also provide an open developer space for mentors and mentees to take off their hats and come together around the sustainable development goals and build local and global projects together. Additionally, the opportunities like this to highlight the sustainable development goals and also elevate our voice to the ears of global decision makers. So I wanted to just highlight a little bit about MENTEE. And again, appreciate everybody here today. We were talking and chatting before we began about this past year and how some of us have been prevented to go home and others are concerned about when the vaccine comes out. And all of our lives have been greatly impacted in ways we would never have imagined a year ago. Additionally, this ripple effect is far reaching and disproportionately my mentees have suffered. Unfortunately, global inequities have grown dramatically. And this led me to create this discussion series. So today it's the first of these series, these talks. And today we're focusing on the idea of seeing value in every human. And I've invited these amazing panelists here today to talk about current concerns, current challenges, and future hope in education and development. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Sumi Somaskanda, who is an international reporter, writer, editor. She's host of Studio Berlin. She's news anchor for Deutsche Welle in Berlin. Sumi is also a MENTEE advisor and a global mentor. And she continues to offer her expertise, and today is no exception. So thank you so much, Sumi.
Letitia, thank you so much for the kind words and the introduction. I'd say MENTEE is my favorite of all of those roles. This is a really exciting way to kick off what is going to be a great year for MENTEE as well. And I'm just also really thrilled to be able to facilitate this discussion, which comes, like you said, Letitia, at a really crucial time as we discuss these particular SDGs. And we have, if you look at these faces here, the very best guests to explore these issues here. So I know we have a lot to talk about, and we'll have some questions from some of the practitioners as well who are joining us. So I'll just introduce everyone in case you're not familiar with these faces here on the screen. Right in the middle, Mohammed Abdelkader is the executive director of the Stevens Initiative, at the Asmans Institute. And he previously served in the administration of President Barack Obama as Deputy Assistant Secretary for International and Foreign Language Education at the US Department of Education's Office of Post-Secondary Education. Before that, he was also the Director of Development for the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. Mohammed, great to have you there. I see here Dido on the bottom of the screen. Dido Baranshamaje is a community builder and a social justice advocate. He is Director of Innovation at the Siegel Family Foundation, which is building a community of organizations all across sub-Saharan Africa. And Dido is also the creator and director of their social impact incubator at the foundation, a 2019 Obama Foundation Fellow, we should say, and also a BMW Responsible Leader. We can't forget to add that. Dido, great to have you on as well. I'll move on to Yuri Belfali there in Paris. She's the head of division for the Directorate for Education and Skills at the OECD, where she provides direction on knowledge generation and policy concerning early childhood education, also skills development, something we'll be discussing, and school systems. And before joining the OECD, Yuri worked for UNICEF as a chief of the education section in Morocco, and also for the World Bank in human development. So Yuri, great to see you. On to Beatrice Guillen. She's the Principal Social Innovation Executive at CAF. Some of you might be familiar, that's the development bank in Latin America. And Beatriz helps identify ideas and services for sustainable solutions to social challenges in the region in Latin America. And she also has a global perspective because before that, Beatriz worked on microfinance, and she focused on agriculture in Kenya, Ethiopia, India as well. And she is also a BMW responsible leader. And we have, of course, last but not least, Dina Sharif. She's the executive director at the Legation Center for Development and Entrepreneurship at MIT. And Dina started her own social enterprise called Ahead of the Curve in 2012. She's also a senior advisor to Ashoka, providing support to their global fellowship arm. And she serves also as an advisor to the President of Egypt on economic development. So again, a warm welcome to all of you. We wanted to discuss some of these issues surrounding the SDGs that Letitia had mentioned. And I would start with you, Mohammed, they're right in the middle. What would you say are the biggest challenges that you face in trying to foster more equal access? So if access is the key word here that we're going to talk about first and foremost, through your international exchanges, but also foreign language studies or skills training opportunities.
Thanks so much, Sumi, and thanks, Letitia, for pulling us together. So nice to be with just such great colleagues. I'll answer the question in a couple different ways. First, given my work at the Stevens Initiative, we focus on virtual exchanges. So essentially, there's already recognition that a lot of students face barriers to a global experience as part of their education. And if you step back, we live in an environment where for many of our countries, many of our communities are diverse. Young people need to have a global perspective, what we call global competencies. They need to be able to understand global events, be able to connect those dots. They need to be able to connect and communicate across difference, and ultimately act on that data, act on that information. It's just an active part of being a global citizen, but a lot of people don't have access to those types of experience. So from a virtual exchange perspective, a couple of barriers that we do face. First, because of the fact that it's virtual, there are always issues around technology access. So broadband, access to hardware, access to platforms in some cases, although those barriers are coming down as technology has become, the price of technology has come down. There's still barriers. We can't assume that every young person has access. And there are several advocacy campaigns that have gone on to try to make sure that broadband is in rural areas, to provide, laptops and tablets to students in different parts of the world. And certainly here in the United States, we struggle with it. That's definitely one thing that we think about. Another part I'll say, and this is perhaps specific to the United States, is that a lot of our K-12 schools in particular are focused so much on literacy and numeracy as things that they're trying to get up to a certain level. Oftentimes it comes at the expense of things like the humanities, things like world languages, things like these sort of international education, global education activities. And so the challenge is then the students fundamentally just don't have access to this type of course material or these types of experiences. That becomes a problem. On the post-secondary side, from a virtual exchange perspective, we are seeing a lot of, sort of a lot of activity, and we're very pleased to see that. But there's still a barrier, in the United States. The Institute for International Education recently put out some data where 1 in 10 American college students were going abroad. Now, certainly, COVID has affected that. We'll still wait and see what happens post-COVID. But I am pleased to say that virtual exchange as a different type of intervention. It's not a study abroad. We don't pretend that it's study abroad or study abroad light. It is a different international education intervention that has broadened access and given a lot of young people the opportunity to connect and collaborate with another student, perhaps in another part of the world. So I'll kind of pause there. I know it's a broad question, but there are certainly some challenges out there around access, and what we're trying to do is drive some funding to organizations that are going to try to bridge that gap.
That's really interesting, and we'll come to the funding piece a little bit later. Sure. Dito, first of all, picking up there, Mohammed give us a really good glimpse into some of, or a series of barriers that he faces in his experience. Some of them are particular to the US, but what parallels do you see among the groups that you're working with in Sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to accessing resources and also community support?
Oh, thank you very much. That's such a big question. I'm going to try to figure out how to tackle it. First, I work for a foundation that whose existence is really to use racial and diversity and equity lens in how we think about grant making. It's a foundation that is based in the US, and we fund a little over 200 partners across Sub-Saharan Africa. And why the choice of Sub-Saharan Africa as a region? Because the founder himself realized that there is a gap between talent and opportunities for most of young people who live on this continent. And then when you try to dig a little bit deeper, you realize that actually access to education and to resource goes through many layers on this part of the continent, where you have to start reinventing everything from the infrastructure to technology and to bringing in expertise. We're not even talking about proximity to funding. So oftentimes those who have proximity to funding are able to sort of create value and really shift the spaces that education, how it looks, how it works, and who it serves. But on this, in terms of parallelism, we see a lot of need to really infuse new values of what education creates. The education system that has been for a very long just around literacy and around understanding the world, less much about using the resource around us in a way that is effective, that is efficient, and that is sustainable, and also collaborative in creating a future where everyone is included. So here what I'm talking about is this idea of rethinking the space of education to infuse new values. Long ago, we thought education was a pathway to leadership and to decision making, but there's no correlation between going to school and being a good decision maker. So right now, how do we break down the sort of barriers, or relearn the things that we thought about on how we provide education and what it does in a way that acknowledges everyone and creates a space that is more collaborative. So there's so many examples, like, you know, the education system in the Northern Europe. And when you think about the parallelism between what is happening in the US or in Africa, you see this need of, I don't know the word in English, in French it's décomplexer, to break down a little bit the way we have structured education in creating and understand where the gaps are, and then design it in a way that, one, creates some sort of resilience for kids to learn things that harness their talents, their really, really unique talents, in creating this future that is collaborative and mutual. And
those are really,
I think that's it.
Go ahead,
That's
Peter,
really
please.
it in terms of what some of the parallelism. It's proximity, and of course it's like rethinking technology and the infrastructure that's going to sustain education for the future, and also really infusing new values of what education does and achieves.
Those are really great points. And Yuri, I've seen you nodding really as Mohammed and Dito have both been speaking. So what does the OECD's research really play out when it comes to the avenues of access and equity, where the biggest hurdles are from your organization's perspective?
Yep. OECD conducts lots of international comparative studies, and actually international comparison highlights the challenges, but also where we could work further to take out of these barriers to the equity issues. I would like to focus on two things. First is the resources. When we talk about COVID context, as Mohammed has said, there is a concern of the inequality in terms of the access, the opportunities for disadvantaged students to learn. But actually, this is not a new problem. This is just a manifestation, accelerated manifestation of the structural problems of inequality, which existed already in the system. Because, for example, when we look at the countries, 80 countries who participated in the PISA study, for example, you might know this study of the 15 years old learning. Almost all countries have more resources, better teachers, more pedagogical resources in advantaged schools, which means that in disadvantaged schools, where we need more support for struggling students, actually education policymakers and governments provide less resources. So we need to turn that trends around. But also the second issue is the process of learning. It's well known that advantaged students have higher chance to be successful in math and science and reading, and we can easily imagine that. But what is more worrisome is what's happening in the process of learning. For example, motivations or disposition to learn or enjoyment of learning. Here, you can also see a big gap between disadvantaged and advantaged students. For example, in the latest study that we have done, we asked the questions about mindset, whether students have a growth mindset, believe that they can be better, they can make efforts and be successful, or fixed mindset. They believe that their intelligence is fixed and given and you cannot do anything. And unfortunately, disadvantaged students show more of the fixed mindset compared to the advantaged students. Where it comes from, maybe family background, but also in school, sometimes teachers' behavior and their communication, their messaging and relationship with students are biased depending on where students are from, regardless of their potential, regardless of their performance in academic activities. So we need to think about how we can make sure that there's sufficient support and appropriate support, but also sufficient and appropriate encouragement, non-biased, non-stereotyped views on the potential of students regardless of their background. These are the two important things, I believe.
Thanks, Yuri. We really, I think, up to this point, have run the gamut of these hard and soft resources that are important for equity and for access. So Dina, if I can make you a little bit of a problem solver here, how do you think we can break some of these patterns that lack of access and equity in education actually create?
You know, it's interesting. This morning, I was sitting with one of my favorite business leaders in Cairo. His name is Mohammed Al-Qalla, and he created, I could definitely consider him a systems change entrepreneur. He created the first affordable education company in Egypt that is actually scaled. And we were having a conversation about why we're not seeing more businesses emerge that are really focused on affordability. And I wanted to draw attention to that because I think one of the biggest barriers to access to quality education is affordability. And technology can definitely help, but I think if business leaders specifically, and when we're thinking about privatization of education, I'm keeping public education outside of this, but specifically in places like the Middle East and Africa and Latin America and emerging markets where quality education is limited and where it's very difficult for young people in remote areas to get access to quality education, there are many opportunities, I think, for entrepreneurs to be scaling more affordable models of high quality education using technology. And we're not seeing enough of that yet. I think also partnerships are critical. We really need to leverage partnerships with the private sector more effectively in terms of creating access to technology. So a little bit of what Mohammed was talking about is how do we, even if we have the tools, how do we make sure that everyone has access to the internet so that they can access these tools? And I think that there's a lot that can be done in partnering with the private, creating these types of public-private partnerships. And then I think that, I really think it's time, and COVID has really demonstrated that this is possible. The idea of how we can use technology to democratize high quality education. Why should only a very small few get access to quality education like what we have at MIT or what you get at the top private schools, when we know that technology can really make this accessible to everyone, but we're not having those conversations? How do we, I think access is one thing, but if you create access with poor quality, I'm not sure that we're going to get the kind of leaders that Dito was talking about either. So I think there needs to be this moment where there is a convergence between we do need to create access. Technology can create access. We need the kind of partnerships to allow that. But how do we also bring quality along with that accessibility? And I'm not sure we're having those conversations yet. But I do know that to break patterns, we do need to tackle the issue of affordability, and we need to tackle the issue of seeing a lot more effective partnerships emerge and a lot more leveraging of what the private sector can bring to the table.
Thanks, Dina. And I think that plays also really well going to Beatrice now to ask you, because you actually work with some of the social entrepreneurs who try to address some of these challenges. What do they face when they try to find the community they need to grow?
Yeah, so I think, thank you, and thank you for the invitation to be in this panel. But I think Latin American social entrepreneurs says a distinctive challenge that is how to scale, right? And I think there are like many underlying causes, but I would think that I would like to mention four. And the first one is one that has already been mentioned, that is the access to capital, and not only in the early stages, but then long-term capital to prove these models and to be able to really scale and prove like that their initiative is working. Then we have very complex regulations, like I think many of the countries you live in or you've worked have, but the problem is that Latin America has many small sized countries. So, I mean, you have Central America and then Bolivia, Paraguay, these are very small countries. So when you want to expand your business, we have seen very good ideas, social innovations, but then when they want to scale in another country, it becomes so difficult because it means like having to start over. And then there's something that I don't know if you have this problem in other regions, but we have kind of a problem of dying of success. And this is because there's an overdose of awards for social entrepreneurs. And so I feel many entrepreneurs focus on this glamour of the awards of these international platforms and do not focus on the everyday business that sometimes tend to be a bit more boring, you know, taking care of logistics or managing your team. So I've seen these, unfortunately, with some entrepreneurs and then that have failed at the end. And then finally, and Mohammed mentioned diversity, right? And I think we lack diversity in our pool of social entrepreneurs. So the average Latin American social entrepreneur looks like this. Young, white, male from the upper class. And that makes very difficult, you know, to really connect with the community and understand the needs of the community, right? So probably they haven't attended public schools, they come from private schools, right? So we see that, and this is, I mean, donors, we are also to blame because we should do a better effort or a task to look for, you know, entrepreneurs from rural areas, from indigenous communities, from, you know, so I think these are some of the problems. I mean, there are many, but I would like, I don't know, and I would also like to know if these are common to other regions, right?
Yeah, those are really interesting insights into what you're facing there in Latin America. Perhaps I can pick up on the technology piece because I think it's something that each and every one of you have mentioned. And Mohammed, you know, you talked a little bit about some of the doors and access that technology itself has provided. You know, Dina mentioned that that doesn't necessarily translate to quality. So what are some of the limitations that we face when it comes to technology?
Well, absolutely. A great question, Sumi. I'd say a couple particular thoughts. First of all, you know, technology does broaden access, but technology doesn't mean that something is free. There are still facilitation costs. So when we think about, you know, I'll step back with the Stevens Initiative. We see ourselves as a field builder. We want to mainstream and broaden and to grow the virtual exchange field. And our work really falls into three primary buckets. One is that we're a grant maker, so we make grants and investments to organizations who are doing US MENA virtual exchange. The second part of our work is that we're a knowledge hub, so we're aggregating information and sharing that information and putting it out there openly for educators and administrators to use. And then finally, we're an advocate for the field. And one of the things that we've observed is that, again, just because an intervention, in this case a virtual exchange, utilizes technology doesn't make it free. You still have the costs of the facilitators who are going to set up these exchanges, the folks who are going to design and integrate it into the curriculum, the actual cost of the technology, of the hardware, of the broadband. I mean, there is a cost there. We do think about overall cost per student and try to bring it down, but it's never free. And that's something to keep in mind. You know, sometimes we get these comparisons, and I think they're lazy comparisons. When folks will look at a platform, say like Facebook, well, Facebook isn't free either. You are the commodity. You're the one who's being sold on Facebook. So I think it's important for us to educate educators and administrators on the true cost of doing this. With that being said, I will share that you know, we do think about this cost per student. We have made some investments in programs that are operating in lower bandwidth environments to broaden access. to youth in different parts of the world. As Yuri mentioned, some of this has really been accelerated by COVID, and some of our partners that we have funded have developed programs that are meeting the learner at home versus, sort of classroom-based virtual exchange. Some of the programs that we have supported also use an asynchronous way of connecting students. One that helps get around the issue of time zones. So if a student is not able to connect on a real-time virtual exchange, they're able to do it asynchronously with obviously the facilitation of their teacher or an educator of some sorts, which is really great. That allows more people to participate. And then finally, that technology has also broadened access, because inevitably in a virtual exchange, we do sometimes encounter language barriers. We can't assume that every young person speaks English. While a lot of the virtual exchanges that we have supported do take place in English, some have had Arabic, some have had Kurdish. And again, not every young person speaks English, Arabic, Kurdish, French. There are a lot of other languages. So actually, with a lot of the open tools that are out there, a lot of the translation tools, it's allowed more people to participate. And those are things we're always watching and seeing where we can advocate and push for more of those types of technologies in the space.
I should add there that Mentee is also offering mentoring asynchronously. So that's a pretty fabulous tool that's available as well. Dito, if I could bring you in there, given some of these limitations, but also opportunities that Mohammed was just speaking about, how do you think you can best improve equity responsibly within Africa, but also globally? Because we really want to look at this from a global perspective as we're all sitting around the world here.
One of the things that I have been experiencing for the last probably 10 years in philanthropy, and particularly in Africa, is how the people who are close to the problems are really not close to the solution. We have larger multilateral organizations and bilateral organizations that run the agenda. And when we have crises like COVID or any other, in order to improve equity, I think we will have to really think about how do we really bring to the table the people who are being affected to help us actually resolve problems and bring solutions in a way that is more sustainable and that is just, because they live with the consequences of it. So one thing that I think is really, really important is really bringing the missing voice to the table and in order for them to help design, so that we don't have solutions that are designed from elsewhere or by people who don't live with the consequences of it. And the second thing I think is around this idea that change brings change. So I'm really glad that Beatrice talked about funders and money. Oftentimes we have made a mistake of thinking that people have funding and money, that they have good ideas. And we have to really challenge that idea and we try to find experts who actually can help us navigate these spaces. And on the other hand, speaking about funders, they also like to work within their own framework to look at their own impact metrics and etc. It's really important to start thinking about ways to have a value chain based investment, where we sort of think about a 360-degree impact evaluation, and to go beyond our own metrics, basically. And I think another thing in terms of improving equity, we have seen the similarities between the US and Africa recently, where during the previous election in the US, we community leaders have done tremendous work mobilizing people. And now how do we start thinking about ways to bring funding in places where there wasn't before? And think about it in a way that is more agile and flexible and multi-year, because these are problems and opportunities of the future that require a long-term investment that is beyond the year-to-year planning that funders and donors have. Just because also, funders change every 2-3 years their mind, this should be an issue of the people who are, one, experts, who have understand these problems and opportunities very deeply, and the communities themselves who are going to live with the consequences of it. And I think these are some of the lessons that we could pull, looking at what philanthropy and how change happens across Africa, but also in some degrees to what is really important, bringing the missing voice and the people who are being served to design, and really allowing our place for imagination and disruptive and radical imagination to create new solutions that might not work. We encourage experiments, which is not very much encouraged in philanthropy, because people want safety and certainty that things are going to work, rather than actually allowing a space where we could be a little more creative.
Well, one way maybe is to bring some of those underrepresented voices globally together. And Yuri, you have at the OECD, you've put together the Global Citizen Report. What findings do you think could help shape policy better on a global level? If we're, it's difficult to compare country by country, but regardless, could shape policy better. And what do you think policymakers need as tools to implement some of that policy?
Yeah, Sumi, thank you. I'm glad that you asked this question, because global competence is indeed an important area of learning, and I think it's becoming even more and more important than the academic skills. This is about young people's capacity to understand the world and also to live together. It's not only you to be the winners. It's not only you to find the solutions, but how you can understand the perspective of others and respect others while you express your own view and work together effectively to build the well-being of the community and the world. So this is really relevant today and for the future. And what we have learned from this study, first, more than 50 countries participated in this study, but for the age of 15. But I believe that this is something which could tell us about young people's population in general. Some countries, like Canada or Colombia, are showing strong global competence compared to the academic skills. So Canada, for example, is already doing well in math and science, but they are doing even better than expected in global competence. Colombia as well, in an international comparison, Colombia is not so high in terms of the ranking, but if you look at the academic skills of Colombian students and global competence, they are showing quite high level of global competence than expected from the academic levels, which is interesting. Whereas country like Korea, they are almost top in different subjects like math and science, but their global competence is not so high. So there's something that education systems can do, or there's something which makes the difference in terms of the global awareness and understanding of students. And some of the findings to feed into our thinking. Well, first, good news is that more than 80% of students around the world who took this survey are saying that they respect people from different cultures, from different backgrounds, so they have a quite positive views on others. And also 4 out of 5 students are saying that they have opportunities in schools to get involved in activities, to know about the world and to understand others, which is really positive. At the same time, the difference of awareness and understanding of global issues differ depending on how students are exposed to this kind of international and global activities. The more students are exposed to, for example, the understanding of climate change or migration or diversity in cultural, social context, they are more also open and they show the willingness to contribute to these issues. If their parents are more sensitive to these topics, students also tend to be more open for the global issues. What is also very interesting is that students' perception of the existence of discrimination mirrors how teachers behave about discrimination. If students say that their teachers behave in a discriminatory way, students also are showing towards more discriminatory behaviors towards the other students. So this shows that it's very important to see this dynamic and organic ecosystem. Students are not alone. They learn from not only textbooks, but they learn from teachers, they learn from parents, and they learn from communities. So we need to create an environment where students and others work together to enhance this understanding of respect of diversity and richness of cultural and social diversity. But also, data showed that students' real contact with the world, For example, if students have opportunities to meet with other students from different countries or speaking other languages, that could make a difference. So Mohammed already told about the international exchange online. There are also many institutions trying to do that. Nowadays, we can do this without traveling. Using the technologies, we can connect students with the real world of whatever countries they want to connect. So that kind of things could create a real sense of understanding of what's happening in the world, but also could potentially help these young people to be the agent to build the diverse and respectful society in the future.
That's a really interesting point about creating that environment that perhaps fosters a more global perspective on the world. And part of that environment is something we've touched on a bit, social entrepreneurship. And Dina and Beatrice, I'll ask both of you about this. Dina, starting with you. What initiatives have you seen out there, most promising examples have you seen of social entrepreneurs trying to address some of the issues that we've discussed already?
I first want to, can I just move back a little bit, because I think the social entrepreneurs who I find are doing some of the most interesting work when it comes to tackling issues related to access are ones that also look at equity differently. And I think it's just important to recognize that issues related to equity are deep-rooted structural issues that are preventing us from creating more equitable environments. But I also think mindsets are preventing us. And I think it's, to a lot of what you were saying, Dito, was resonating with me in the sense that I think we do need to include heavily those who have the most need in the solution, but we often don't. And a lot of that is related to bias. A lot of that is related to the words that we use. A lot of that is thinking of students and young people as problems as opposed to assets. And I think that that can create real problems in creating equity. And I think for me, for example, we have a number of Legatum fellows. So the Legatum Center at MIT, we have a fellowship program for students who start impact-driven businesses within emerging markets. And one of my favorite fellows is from Mexico. He started a business called Clinicus, and he was able to scale very quickly a solution that would target diabetes, which was very difficult for the majority of the population to get access to. And he used technology, and he used a very different mindset to create access to what was a very basic public health service. And policymakers really struggled to do that. And I think the only reason why he was able to do it is because he saw all those patients and consumers as a partner with him in creating this solution, whereas policymakers tend to not see it that way. They see these consumers as a problem that they have to solve as opposed to a part of the solution. And I think that creates a real barrier. And I think also the social entrepreneur that I was sitting with this morning who was able to scale a private affordable education model across Egypt and is now expanding to other parts of Africa. I think when he started the business, the intention behind it was the majority of the population in Egypt doesn't have access to high quality education, and high quality education is only provided by the private sector, which is not affordable to the majority of the population. And he spent a lot of time talking to middle to lower middle class families about what they need, what they want to see in education, and really worked with them to develop a model that would work at a price that would work, and was able to scale that by partnering with varying different people in the ecosystem, including the public sector and policymakers. So I think social entrepreneurs, they bring a very different mindset to problem solving, but they also bring a very different mindset to how they partner with beneficiaries in the solution. And that's just not common. And those kinds of leaders are ones that we need to see more than ever now. And And, you know, I'd love to hear more of what Beatrice has to say, because she also works very closely with social entrepreneurs. But I think, you know, I also agree with you that we're also not digging up enough social entrepreneurs from remote areas, from indigenous populations. We often find ones who are already privileged, well educated. And then there are a lot of ones who are at the grassroots level that aren't being recognized. And that's another problem. And that's another structural problem, is that we tend to gravitate towards the usual suspects who speak in the way that we want to hear and who have access to resources. But we don't go out of our way to dig into the ones that are doing amazing things in remote communities at the grassroots level.
Beatrice, I'd love to get your take on it.
Sure, and I after hearing what Dido and Dina have said, I would like to even be a bit more provocative, because they were saying, let's include community in the decision making. Completely agree, but I even would go like a step further and say, and mention unconditioned cash transfers, who have proven to be very successful. So what if less is more? I mean, maybe we are the problem. We are the ones making it not as efficient as it could be, like development money and resources, right? Because we are in the middle, we are the intermediaries, or designing plans and programs that at the end it might be more effective to just give free money with free or with no or very few strings attached. So I mean, there's organizations like Give Directly that are interesting just to follow and see what they're doing. And the research has shown that it's effective, it has proven effective. So just to be a bit provocative and just put this on the table, because this is something we should follow and see why is it been so effective, and of course, bring them.
I'm with you, Beatrice. Unconditional cash transfers have worked in my country, in Egypt. And I think a big part of it is you're giving agency to the person to make their own decisions. And in giving that agency, they are making the decisions that make the most sense for them. And it's impacting our economy, it's impacting their livelihoods. And it's interesting because for so long, people were so against cash transfers. Give poor people free money? What?
Yes.
Of course they're going to misuse it, but it's a big myth. That's another myth that needs to be dispelled.
It is, no, and precisely the title of this panel is Seeing Value in Every Human. So I think this is a way of really, you trust them and that they are going to be able to do what is right for them with that money. But this is a bit controversial. So you were asking Sumi about examples of social entrepreneurs, successful social entrepreneurs doing things in this field. And I mean, there are so many, but I would like to mention one. Since you are in Germany, I mean, Bogota, this is a model from an Ashoka fellow that we brought from Germany to Colombia and also Mexico, where we have trained women that are visually impaired in the early detection of breast cancer because of their ability to detect malformations in the breast better than anyone else, better than the best doctors. So that's a way we were talking about seeing people as assets. So this is you transform a disability or into an asset, right? So this is an example that it's been very difficult, as I was saying, like when you say scale, sometimes it's starting over, because the health system in Germany has nothing to do with health system in Colombia and in Mexico. So replicating this model has been like almost starting from the beginning. We've learned a lot, but I think this is an example of how, I mean, you can, I mean, people are really assets and are really have amazing abilities that can be transformed and I mean, put in use in a very exceptional ways, right?
Thanks, Beatrice. That's a great example there. And I have so many more questions, but I need to cede and yield the floor to others who certainly have questions. And I got a few questions in advance from Letitia that she shared with me. And two of them are for everyone, but one is very specific. So I'll start with that one, and it's specifically to Dido. And it's from one of MENTEE's NGO partners. And Salim Mapanda Idi, I think, of the Yapo organization in Tanzania, had this question specifically for you, Dido, asking, As a social justice advocate, what are your strategies in creating inclusive education in sub-Saharan Africa, especially in Tanzania, through enabling non-state actors like open schools to help young girls who are overwhelmingly dropping out of school because of teenage pregnancies or child marriage?
Oh, Sami, I wish I knew the answer to that question. It's a $1 million question around how education is not just a matter of education, but it's a matter of access and safety in communities. So we're at Single Family Foundation, we don't fund projects and we don't fund programs, but we fund people who are coming up with ideas on how to solve these issues deeply. So oftentimes what it looks like is really having a 10,000 feet view and use some sort of technology to see where different partners are to fund with this 360-degree funding investment that I talked about, where you go in a community not only finding one or two things, but looking at different elements that affect other elements in terms of how we fund. What this means in a practical sense, like in a community where there's no school, we're not going to fund only school, we're going to fund healthcare, we're going to fund livelihood programs, we're going to fund vocational training, not because they're not smart, but because maybe their vocation is somewhere else. And oftentimes people don't go to school because their health only makes sense. So we think about this whole holistic investment model where we don't only choose things that make sense for us, but where we really work with the community with a sort of community participation grant making, where people really prioritize the things that they value and really point us in the direction of the social entrepreneurs and the leaders that they have seen really addressing this tremendously, and then fund them all together. And slowly our role becomes creating a space where they come and share knowledge and share expertise, and where together they really start tackling some of the systemic change that needs to happen, because they understand, they have the trust of their community, they have the relationship that it takes to sort of start speaking to governments around how to fill the gaps. I think it has to do with we being open-minded, able to use the term to take risk, because it's not risk, it's to really do things that make sense. There's a connection, there's a connective tissue between healthcare, education, agriculture, livelihoods, and technology. So our funding philosophy really follows the same. It's really going in, not dissociating issues within issues, but actually really trying to figure out the leaders and the programming that it takes to really affect change at that sort of scale. I don't know if I have answered that question very well, but I think it has to be with agility and willingness to really go fund what community decides makes sense.
Definitely, I think a holistic approach is exactly what we were looking for here. And I actually have two questions from mentees themselves, which I'm very happy to put here to the group. So if you feel like you'd like to answer it, just unmute yourself. First from mentee Inara Virani asks here, how can civilians of a developing country advocate for education and skill development when they lack materials and resources? I think that's a very crucial question there. Would anybody like to take that one?
I mean, I think it's an excellent question, and we've talked a lot about social entrepreneurs in this panel. And when you tackle such complex problems such as education, I think we need to shift maybe the mindset. We've talked also about the myth, and I think to solve these problems, we have to stop thinking about the myth of the superhero or the social entrepreneur or the single product or single service that is going to solve this problem. These are very complex problems that require civil society, private sector, the public sector, of course. And if you think, for example, in the US, where I mean, you have this a problem of like how do you educate poor children in a time of declining social mobility? So how do you do that? I mean, I'm a citizen, I have no money, and do I have? And you've seen solutions such as like apps to reward teachers that are doing great and weed out professors that are not good. But I think that we need to think beyond that. and think in a more systemic way, where we should be thinking of how do we end funding schools by property taxes, or how do we create a pool of funding that to fund schools more equally. So in this shift of mindset of thinking like more systemically, we need the civil society to start changing the mindset, not creating an app or not. I mean, that's of course it's necessary, but if you don't have the money or you're not a social entrepreneur, you don't see yourself as a social entrepreneur, but you can start, maybe not like Greta Thunberg, we are not, I mean, we maybe are not as leaders as she is, but you can start mobilizing, social capital and starting from the bottom up to highlight these issues, like how come are we still funding schools? I mean, and Mohammed probably knows more or Yuri about this, but from someone like a common citizen like me, to me, it's like mesmerizing. We're not doing more on that. So with no resources, I think we can start like mobilizing society to push these things, this debate, and go beyond just like very concrete solutions to become like a broad issue, right?
Thank you very much, Beatriz, for that answer. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Can I jump in, Sumi? Yeah, just a couple of quick things. I mean, it's an interesting question, and I think one that requires a lot of attention, but I would say just on the very surface is that, yeah, look, in some environments, you certainly need resources to advocate for policy change. I live right outside of Washington, D.C., and a lot of companies spend millions upon millions of dollars on, sort of very expensive lobbyists and law firms, and they use them to advocate for policy change. But I do also want to point out today is January 25th. 10 years ago was the start of the Egyptian Revolution. And much of that happened literally with, because of a fruit vendor in Tunisia who set himself on fire to make a point. We had just enough social media penetration to where people were able to learn about it, to see about it, to see the event, and frankly, it fanned public action where people took to the streets, and a lot of the message, the outrage, the frustration was transmitted using social networks, and folks were able to mobilize accordingly. So that's certainly something to point out, that for many young people, now you may not have access to a lobbying firm, but a lot of people do have access to basic technology that allows folks to organize and, on one hand, take to the streets, but on the other hand, also to get your message out there, right? I mean, we've seen some very effective uses of technology like the Me Too movement, which has been very effective on social media. Here in the United States, there are some platforms where anybody can log in, find out who their elected members of Congress are, who your senators are, your representatives, your governor, and you can send them an email with your perspective. So I think, I think there's still some work to be done in that area, but there are some readily available tools for the public to use. I think sometimes it's a matter of also emphasizing for our young people what productive civic engagement really looks like and how to take that first step, because sometimes it feels like that's another world, like it's removed, it is difficult to engage with elected officials, but there are some tools there to allow folks to have their voices heard.
I also think that another myth that should be dispelled is the myth of scarcity, right? So I think scarcity is also a mindset that we've all inherited. I studied economics. I don't like to call myself an economist because I think economists have been the biggest spreaders of the scarcity mindset. And I think if we just shift our mindset to abundance, you'll find that there's so many resources that we can use to actually create the change that we need. And when we start with this mindset of we are lacking, it just becomes more and more difficult. And I think that is one of the biggest myths that we need to dispel.
And one of the resources that is available but not necessarily used well is the fact and the evidence. And that could make a difference. And when you talk about the advocacy, without resources, you can use the available facts and resources that UNESCO, OECD, and other international organizations collect. But what is powerful is the stories behind. And you could make a story to make sense out of the statistics and say that, yes, this fact shows that this is the problem. This is the possible solutions. This kind of push could really raise the profile of the discussions and create the channels for the change.
Thank you all for those answers. Those are really interesting. And I want to make sure we have another question from a mentee that we get in there. And I'll just say to the participants at this moment, if you have any additional questions, do make sure to get them into the Q&A there so I can take a look. But there is another one from mentee Vida Opoku, who's perhaps looking at all of you as mentors and wants to know what your advice is to mentees and people who want to be good leaders, right? So we talked a bit about that in the future. What are some of the things that you would suggest that they should be doing in college and as young professionals to improve these challenges and also help create a better future?
Oh, maybe I could take a quick stab at that. I think if I were to give advice, it would be, first of all, none of us are leaders all the time. You know, leadership it's not just something that we are. It's something, it's an activity that we exercise when we decide to step up to solve a problem that has no real known solution. I think that we confuse often leadership with titles of authority, and that's a big mistake. So if I were to give you advice, I would say, you know, as a young person in college, pay attention to all of everything that surrounds you, really, all of the challenges that you see around you, and break them down. Understand who the different players are, understand the different stakeholders, and most importantly, understand the role that you're playing in it or not playing. And try to see a system as a whole so that when you do decide to step up and potentially exercise leadership to create a solution or to create change, that you know who you need to engage in that process, because none of us can do it alone.
So I wanted to interrupt and say thank you so much to Sumi and to the panel. I know we're coming to a close on our time. I wanted to just first of all offer from both my hat as a founder and CEO of MENTEE, but also as a high school educator. This conversation, I think, was a very important one. And beyond that, for all of us, when we look at development and education beyond the youth range, although it ranges in a beautiful way across the world when we say youth, I think, you know, as we look at possibility and potential, I loved this idea of abundance and what that could mean. And I just wanted to share for me what I believe that means, and the ability in which we have when we create that mindset of abundance is really look at the young person and sharing, you know, one of the best tools besides social media and all these things is collaboration, is looking for others who want to work with you. And in this group, we have an incredible collection of different perspectives. And when we come together and collaborate, we can do so much more. So I appreciate all of you coming, putting your minds together. I hope we all walk away with something we've learned, something we're thinking about, something that's gnawing at us that we want to solve now, and perhaps a different perspective. MENTEE does bring together NGOs globally across borders, and NGOs who are run by those who are trying to solve challenges that they themselves have experienced. It's very important to me to also empower the mentee themselves. They're not matched intentionally in this mentorship program. They get power and they create circles of mentorship around them. And you spoke about the idea of enhancing diversity and understanding. And for me, these collaborations truly in the space of mentee come from global mentors who live across the world in different kinds of sectors, having themselves varying experiences, and sharing and giving and building with folks who are, again, every range. My oldest mentee is in his 50s, to this idea of coming together and truly being humans wanting to solve problems. So I appreciate everyone today. I want to end simply with my contact information for those who are here and who don't know MENTEE, and kind of just show you how you can contact me really quickly. I want to thank you again, all your panelists. I'm so grateful very much for Mohammed Abdul Qadar, Dido Baran-Shamaje, Yuri Balfali, Beatriz Guillen, Dina Sharif, and Sumi Somaskanda. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for
Bye-bye.
having us,
For
Letitia.
having
Thank
us.
you.
Bye-bye.
Great to talk
Bye.
to you guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Letitia.
Thank you.